And welcome back to Pastor Plek's podcast. I'm your host, Pastor Plek, and joining me in studio is none other than Pastor Holland. Greg, welcome back, Holland.
Hello, thank you so much.
We are talking about 2 Corinthians today and how you are blessed in affliction. And so, Holland, first question, have you ever been afflicted?
I have been afflicted, yes.
How have you been afflicted?
You know, I've been afflicted in a couple of different ways. Been afflicted with grief.
Ooh. Yeah.
Grief is a real affliction when I have lost loved ones before. Lost my dad right after moving to Wells Branch and getting married, and that was one of the hardest.
How long after you got married did he pass away?
About 5 months.
Yeah. You got married in June?
Got married in September.
And then so it was...
And then he passed away in February of 2013.
And then my dad passed away that following September.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So affliction happens, and so that's hard. But the cool part that I think about our Christian faith is we have a higher floor than the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean we don't have sadness. That means we don't have darkness. But what I loved is that even when you despair even of life, which is what happened to Paul or what he wrote about in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, is that he had hope that God would save them ultimately by dying, or that he would save their lives. And so I think that's one of the things that is a unique perspective that Christians have. Although, I to be honest, like when I think about death, like there's probably that, it's probably like, you know, I can only attribute to things I know. Like jumping out of an airplane for me was like, very anxious, anxiety driving, and then it happened, and it was like, wow, this is great. I mean, you're in the sky, you're like looking around, your parachute opened, it's pretty great. And that's the only thing I sort of imagine. I'm sure like death of the fear of the unknown is sort of like that, but of a passing from this life to the next. But anyway, I think that the thing that's the struggle is that Christians have an actual hope. We have a theology and an understanding of the life after this, which then should provide a comfort even when things are hard currently. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, amen.
Okay, so Paul shared about the struggle that he had of just kind of life, but that he wanted to use the comfort that he'd been given to bless them. And I think all of us, whenever we go through affliction, whenever we go through struggle, God uses our pain points and the comforts he's given us to then have a purpose to minister to others.
Right.
And so I think you and I both have been able to minister to people in grief, minister to people in the struggle of loved ones making poor decisions, and how we can best support and love our family and beyond, just through pastoring. And I think that's one of the things I feel like is probably not, I don't know. I don't know if that's one of the things we tout. Like, we're like, be a Christian. You have hope when everyone else is in despair. I don't know if that's something like, I don't know if that's like part of our slogan, but it is, I think, a part of the reality of like, where do you turn when you have sadness? And I think Jesus ultimately is the great comfort that we have. Right. Any other thoughts on that just from pastoring and kind of walking people through hard times?
Yeah, I mean, there's a different level of trustworthiness, reliability, confidence, that people have, that you have when you're able to speak not only from theory but from experience, right? And so, like, when you've walked through affliction, when you've experienced grief, when you've faced trials, when you've suffered, it's like your words carry more weight to the people you're ministering to, and so. In some sense, you should expect, okay, if I'm going to be in ministry, then the Lord's going to bring me through suffering and trials so that I can speak from a place of experience to comfort, encourage others with the hope of Jesus. And then, even for those who are not going to be a pastor or something like that, all of us have been given, a ministry in the sense of ministering to others, serving the Lord and serving other people in His name, where suffering is just part of life and is part of following Christ. And if we can see it as the Lord preparing us to minister to others, and the Lord using it, comforting us so that we might be comforters to other people. I think it helps you even in just like while you're in the middle of your own suffering, while you're facing affliction, you can even go like, okay, I know like the Lord has a purpose for this, and I'm going to be able to comfort someone else in this place at some point. I don't know, that can even help you while you're going through it.
Yeah, I agree. So I mean, it's it. Here's the thing that I noticed in this is that Paul was a comforter, right?
Yeah.
And obviously he knew that. And then he made plans to go to Corinth, and then he doesn't follow up on them because he didn't want to have to come up there and be harsh with them. But then people got really upset at Paul and were like, you're vacillating. I can't trust you, all that. And it kind of reminded me whenever, because Paul's like, I want to comfort you. I'm coming to you. I want to help you. And here you are sort of like you don't really care about us. It just reminds me of my kids going like, you hate me when you take away the switch, or, like you promise them ice cream and then a plans change and you got to not do ice cream and then they lose their mind. And ultimately what I think can happen in the church is we have this great comfort in Jesus, but then all of a sudden when a leader doesn't do what we expect them to do, then we lose our minds, and instead of being comforted by Jesus, we break it, we lose heart. This is even when leaders have moral failures, or even when they don't, even when they just like had a change of plans, like in Paul's case. People start to go, they get crushed by that in some ways. Have you seen people's hope and heart get crushed because they put too much emphasis on a person as opposed to getting their comfort from the Lord?
Yeah, man, with planting a church, 8 years ago, or 8 years ago, I think.
2017 to 2025. Yep.
And
years.
not really knowing, what all that was going to look like. It wasn't just, me and my family that, didn't know what it was going to look like. Everyone, that goes in, like on the original team, comes in with expectations about here's how it's going to go, here's what it's going to be. And no one really knows what to expect, and so when your expectations aren't met, there's frustration there. There's, sometimes people are like very willing to shift, like you bring up the example of Paul. Some people are like, man, totally get it. No big deal. And then there's other people who are really upset with Paul. Right. And with everything from planting a church to trying to get established, and when you make any kind of changes or ministry decisions that, people weren't anticipating. Right. Even from some of the, things that seem so minuscule or unimportant, trivial, whatever, it can be a really big deal to people. And so constantly, no matter what stage you're in ministry, it seems like you're always dealing with disappointing people and people putting a lot of pressure on you to be something that that sometimes you never even promised them to begin with, but they're carrying over expectations from a previous church or something like that. And so, that's just an aspect of being in ministry.
And then even beyond ministry, I think with husbands and wives, there's an expectation. This is what wives are supposed to do. And then when the wife doesn't do what she's supposed to do, then there is a real, almost an idol of like your whole heart breaks and falls apart because you were supposed to do what you said you were, or a husband, you were supposed to be or do something that I had in my mind or in my vision, and then it didn't come to fruition. And then you can kind of get shattered by that, as opposed to my hope is in the unchangingness of the Lord, and I'm going to have to respond, adapt, be resilient take initiative into ways to lean into marriage or to lean into parenting or to lean in whatever different part of life that you're at. Okay. Yeah. I feel like those are all wise words, because one of the things I mentioned on Sunday was like providing comfort is uncomfortable. Like if you're a comfort provider, you're going. I said it's kind of like hugging a cactus. Like sometimes people they want comfort, they want to be ministered to, but they have so many issues that leaning into that is going to be painful no matter what. Mm-hmm. All right, so wanted to talk about a question that came up through our podcast question line. And by the way, if you have a question, you can text us at 737-231-0605. And the question is this. I know part of the preaching was the message around comfort, and an example was not to spend money on things you can't afford. What if you want to give lots of money to like the church? but don't have a lot of money? I've been asked this before. All right, thoughts on that, Holland? What do you think?
I love that question.
Like, here's a
That's
person
so
who's-
awesome.
has a big heart, and they want to be generous. And what first step? What do you think?
So when we think about generous, typically we think about the amount of money being
Right.
given.
Yep.
I think biblically, generosity is the amount of faith required to give it.
Right.
So the widow and the two mites, right?
Yep. Mark 12, the poor widow put 2 small coins in the offering, and Jesus praised her for more than the wealthy donors. She put in
Yes.
all she had.
More generous.
Yep.
So generosity is not about the amount given, but the amount of faith required to give it. And so, for this person, first of all, I would say I love that it's like, man, I wish I had more money so that I could give more. That's awesome. And it's almost like, am I being stupid by giving so much?
Right.
Like that's kind of what, where usually people are like, oh, I don't have very much. There's no way I could give. I
Right.
need to, wait until I have more to start giving. This person's like, oh man, I want to give it all. So I think that's really awesome. But to be encouraged, for this person to be encouraged, knowing that generosity is about the faith behind the gift,
Yep.
more so than the amount. And since you're in 2 Corinthians 9, gives a lot of encouragement about giving.
Yeah.
Says verse 11. Or 10 and 11, he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way to be generous in every way.
Yeah.
So that desire to want to be generous, saying like, hey, you start giving what you can now with a heart of faith, and God will bless you that you can give more in the future. So he who's faithful with little will be faithful with much.
God doesn't bless you to raise your standard of living, but to raise your standard of giving.
Boom. There you go.
In fact, 2 Corinthians 8:12, for if the readiness is there,
Yeah.
it is acceptable according to what a person has, not according to what he does not have. So, I think your heart is exactly in the right spot. You desire to give. Your desire to give is honors God, even if your capacity is limited. But guess who can increase your capacity? The Lord. And so I think starting with praying, like, God, I would love to give more. I would love to be able to reverse tithe. I don't know if that's the person's heart, but
What's a reverse tithe?
so where you give 90% and you live off 10.
Oh,
so,
nice.
RJ Letourneau, that was his big thing. Letourneau University, the guy that he was a big inventor of earth movers. And so he gave away 90% of his income and lived off 10. Now, granted, when you're a
What is
gazillionaire,
earth movers?
like bulldozers and for construction sites, he's the one that sort of invented the kind of like,
I thought this was like a movement, like we're the earth movers, like ministry or something that.
So that was kind of like RJ Letourneau really inspired me, and I'm like,
That's
I would
cool.
love to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And I was like, for me, I was like, what if I just gave 1% more every year and just see what happens, and get to the point where it's probably not going to be realistic, and I'm still going.
Love it.
Kind of wild. All right, so I think that's exactly what you should do. And I like this one too from Luke.
But you can't spend money you don't have.
Yes.
So, that's an important part of it is you don't want to go into credit card debt giving to a church, right? You don't want to just be
then
swiping
you'll be part
your
of the benevolence program. And then and then you're just paying interest on money that you're going to make the church pay that interest? No. So I feel like don't give what you don't have, but give what you do have, and then ask God to bless you so that you may give more.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, whoever can be trusted with very little can be also be trusted with much. That's classic Luke 16:10. Be faithful with the small resources, and then God will be pleased and prepare you to handle more if He provides it. So I think that's. Let's talk about the giving in debt, because I think we had whenever capital campaigns come around, and whenever we did our capital campaign for the Revive the Stones, which you still want to get to that, you are more than welcome to for our new church building in Breakaway. But when we did that, some people they looked at their finance, said, I can give this much over and above what I normally give, and then I want to give this much. And there was a faith gap over 3 years that God would somehow provide that. And that you couldn't give it if you didn't have it, but there's a part of faith that you'd lean into God, pledge that much, and then give that much, and then watch God show up and provide. And so, we saw a lot of people do huge faith gaps, and then through unforeseen circumstances that they couldn't have predicted, then God provided the money for them to give. It's kind of wild.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that part is very exciting to watch God work like that. One of my favorite stories from Tim Hawks, the former pastor at Hill Country Bible Church. He got us all together. Do you remember this? And he said, if one of the best things you can do is have a capital campaign for your church. It gets at the very heart of materialism. Even if all you do is raise a lot of money and then burn it in the parking lot. And I love the picture of that, because of course nobody would do that. But the point is, you need to do capital campaigns to call people to give, so that their security isn't in their 401k or their investments or whatever, but is in the Lord. Anyway, I thought that was kind of a cool thought.
What is your take on, when people are thinking through their finances and giving, saving, emergency savings? What about, Proverbs says a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children.
Yep.
How should someone, if they're like, okay, I want to be disciplined. I talked to some guys this morning in the men's study, and we talked about finances and giving, and what do we do if we don't have, feel like we don't have enough to give, or and so it was just a good conversation. I think a lot of people, need some guidance on is, how should I be divvying up what God gives to me in terms of spending, investing, bills, inheritance to my children's children? Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I am a person who is a big fan of the give, live, save plan. And so give first, create a plan for what you're going to live off of, and then save. So if I would break it down, 10, 10, 80 would be like, give 10, save 10, and then that's very general. Some other people would say, save 15 and live off the rest. But start somewhere with all that. Start somewhere with giving, start somewhere with saving, and start somewhere with a budget so that you know actually what you're spending, what's coming in, what's going out. I think for a lot of us, and I think you can probably attest to this, is that people don't budget. They just sort of, money comes in, money goes out, and they're like, ah. And what happens if you depend on credit card, if you're not intentional about where that money goes, then you're not building into an inheritance for your grandchildren, which I think that's obviously biblical, to give an inheritance to your grandchildren. I'm a recipient of an inheritance from my grandfather, and so I definitely want to continue that. And it was a huge, that's how I bought our house. That was wild. So I think that is a huge,
that's awesome.
It's really special, and that's wise living and wise investing. And at the same time, you're not, I think Warren Buffett, he wanted to give away like 99% of his wealth because he's a gazillionaire, all right? But I don't think any of us are in that realm of Warren Buffett. So I do think saving, and what savings wise, because it's not like you're hoarding money. You are paying yourself when you don't have a job. Like, you need to think through that.
What about the proverb of the guy with the barns, storing up the stuff in his barns? And some people will go to that and be like, yeah, you're not supposed to save. That's like worldliness.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think there's a part of, I don't know if that was like how much wealth we're talking about, but don't do that, right? Because you don't know what your life is. And so I think that is true. I think that you're having to hold attention with both sides of that. Your hope can't not be in your money, because we all know that, let's just go to the 1920s. Banks were completely liquidated, and there was nothing there. And but I'm now the FDIC. Oh, you're telling me you're trusting in the government for your $250,000? Well, how long is that $250,000 going to last you?
Yeah.
If everything, let's just say the government does come through. But what if the government doesn't come through? What if the government collapses? Well, we're in America. That would never happen. I'm sure that's what they felt like in Rome. There's a reality that, like, the thing that you trust in cannot be your wealth, because that is here today, gone tomorrow. As Proverbs says, it gets wings and flies away. Or like, as some say, it's like a fake wall, or like a fake castle. So you have this ability, sort of like, I'm okay, but it's an illusion of control.
Yeah.
Anyway, now, is there some probably peace of mind that comes from I have thought through this. I've biblically thought through my finances. I have planned as best you can, but your trust still cannot be in your plan.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I think, there's both of those realities are in the scripture. Of one, it's good to work hard. It's good to make money. It's good to, you can't be generous if you're not making anything to be generous with, It's good to save. It's good to save up for your children's children. It's good to be generous. All those things are good. And at the same time, you can't serve God and money. Yeah. There's a temptation of the idolatry of wealth and materialism, and you can't put your hope in it because it can't save you. And so, all those things are true at the same time.
Yeah, I think it was Proverbs 18 something. A rich man's wealth is like a strong city, and in like a high wall in his imagination. I think that if we have the view that my wealth is not guaranteed, that at any given moment, you could have a house fire and you weren't covered insurance-wise for 2 days or whatever. I think I just was talking to a police officer a couple days ago, and a guy had like a vintage Stingray Corvette worth over $100,000, and his insurance ran out on 4/20, and he hadn't renewed it for whatever reason, and he was going to a car show and drove it straight into a telephone pole. Oof. And gone. He woke up 5 minutes before. He was excited about going to the car show. That's gone. Or a tornado, and you didn't pay up for your house insurance, or whatever the situation is. There was COVID. I mean, who could predict that? And you had all your money invested in, I don't know, something that COVID destroyed. There
you go.
You had a restaurant or something, and or whatever. There's anything could happen, and so there's nothing guaranteed. Sometimes it's a wealth is an illusion of control, but at the same time,
it can be a useful tool.
Yeah, that's a great tool.
Others, to bless your children, your grandchildren. So seeing it as a useful tool, but nothing to put your hope in.
Right, and so I love the fact that somebody wants to be able to give more.
Yeah,
and I think give what you have. I do think I'm a big fan of Malachi 3:10. Bring the whole tithe in the storehouse, that may be food in my house. Test me in this as a Lord host, and see if I'll not open up the windows of heaven for you and pour down a blessing for you until there's no more need. Meaning, there will be no scarcity. It will be, you will have more than enough. And obviously that's an Old Testament verse, and the whole tithe means the 10% that went to the Levites, the 10% that went to national feast, the 10% over 3 years that went to the poor. There's a lot of different tithes, and so you need to have a whole tithe, bring everything. But I think with Jesus, bring expecting a financial provision from God in some way. In fact, what the Bible says, when you give to the poor, you lend to the Lord. And so I think about benevolence giving. There's a blessing that enables for giving, and then you reap what you sow. And I think you mentioned the 2 Corinthians 9, 10, 11.
Yeah.
So I do feel like there is clear scriptural backing, not for a prosperity gospel. God's going to bless me so I can have more for me. He's not going to raise my standard of living necessarily, but he will raise my standard of giving.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, if your standard of living is unsustainable, I think it's okay to raise your standard of living too. Yeah. But, the goal, obviously, that you see in Jesus, just to bring it back to the real gospel, the goal is a generosity that displays the heart of God, right, the love of God. Your trust is in Jesus. You can give in a way that demonstrates God's love to the world. Yeah. So that's
and I don't, like I said, I don't think you have to live like a pauper.
Yeah.
If you've got wealth, enjoy it. God has blessed you with that so that you can enjoy it. But at the same time, the heart of raise your standard of giving, not your standard of living, isn't so that it's so that you kind of you put that perspective first. I want to seek first to expand kingdom, give to the kingdom, and God, it's your money. Do with how God has entrusted you and how He's leading you. And I think that's the important part. I think sometimes people forget that every dollar, not just the money you give to the church, is what God is leading you to use well. It's how much money you put toward your house and how much money you put towards whatever. And it might be, have the big house so you can have a lot of people over, so you can bless a lot of people and have a lot of communal life happening at your house. That's a glorious thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good question.
Yeah, great question. I didn't realize it would take us down that pretty good. That was a fun rabbit hole. So back to comfort, and I think this is God gives us comfort, and sometimes that's material comfort, so that we can bless others. And then we're not supposed to get angry at others when they don't provide us the comfort that we thought they were going to provide us.
Yeah.
At the time they're supposed to provide us. And I think that can be an issue when you're dealing with, Paul as a pastor or as an elder, as an apostle, that they wanted to experience joy from him, or also from just putting your hope in people and not in Jesus.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. We will see you next time on Pastor Plek's podcast, From Our House to Yours. Have an awesome week of worship.